Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Everyday Musician Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Mrugala. My guest today is gaining international fame as a conductor and has conducted ensembles such as the LA Phil, Seattle Symphony, and has been recently appointed as the chief conductor of the Nordwestdeutsche Philharmonie in 2021. Please let me welcome a longtime friend, Jonathon Heyward. Jonathon, pleasure speaking with you after all these years. Thank you for coming on to this week's episode.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to finally reconnect after such a long time.
Jonathon, so for our audience who may not be familiar with some of the things that you've been doing, just briefly describe your history and how you were recently involved in, conducting, and even previously that how you got into music.
Well, it kind of all started for me a bit late, if you will. I think some people kind of start when they're 5, 6 or something like that. But I actually started when I was about 10 or 11 years old, and it was in middle school. And I come from a family that appreciates music and they love music very much, but none of them are musicians. So I didn't have, live music in the house. For me, it was a public school system in my local middle school that kind of granted me the opportunity to do music. So I started off as a cellist, and I actually was supposed to start off really as a violinist, but it's a kind of funny story behind that. And I'll kind of give you the short version. Basically, came to the day that we had to pick up our instruments, and the violin line happened to be very, very long. And the cello line, there was no one in it. And I was quite an impatient guy and leaped over to the cello line. So thus I started playing cello. And little did I know that it was a really great way to start and a great instrument to pick. But I started playing then and taking private lessons then. And then shortly after that, picking up the instrument, I started studying at the Charleston County School of the Arts, which is a school that one has to apply for. And it goes from middle school to high school. And I got a lot from that, actually. Some of the best 7 years that I really had kind of as a musician. And one of the other things that I got from it, not only as being a cellist, but I had the opportunity to conduct. And one day, it's another story, even to give you the short synopsis of it, is that we had a substitute teacher come in a few days before the concert, I believe actually one day before the concert, and he did not conduct. So there had to be someone to go through the pieces as we were just basically about to do this concert. And we did this smartest thing that any middle schooler would do, which is put your name in a hat and swirl it around, and then the substitute teacher would pick a name and that person would conduct. Lo and behold, I was the very first person.
No kidding. You were the very first person.
Yes, yeah. And I was a terribly shy person. I did not like being in front or being center stage, but the odds were that I did it. And I got up on the podium and I really fell in love with the idea of the score immediately. This idea that you could put these different groups of instruments together and make one sound bigger than one person, to me was so amazing. And it was really that moment that I decided to actually do conducting. I was probably about in 8th grade, and that was really the moment. But cello was a means to get there. Cello was always going to be a means to get me to that level, basically.
Thanks for sharing all that, Jonathon. Back when I knew you, you were a cellist.
Yeah.
So been an incredible thing to see you transition from being a cellist, where we met in a conservatory in Boston, all the way to your international presence on the world stage as a conductor. So it's been such a quite an interesting point of view for me, just to see how how much success you've had. And you recently mentioned about education. So, and I know that I didn't include this in the introduction, but I'd be interested, and I'm sure the audience would be interested in learning a little more about your time at the Halle.
Oh, yes, the Halle in Manchester. No, absolutely. I was there for 3 years, and it was an amazing opportunity that came directly after my studies at the Royal Academy of Music. I had just finished a really, really intense 2-year degree with my conducting professor there, Sean Edwards, and I got this job and it was an amazing opportunity to use what I learned, a lot of what I learned in London, uh, and then to go up to Manchester and really put it to practice. I had basically three main roles there. I was the assistant conductor of the orchestra and Sir Mark Elder. I'm expected to be there all the time when Sir Mark Elder was there. I was the music director of the Halle Youth Orchestra, and I also conducted all of the education outreach performances that the Halle Orchestra did. So it was quite an intense job, actually. But all these three different things kind of educated me as a conductor with many different skills that all three of these jobs within one job had to offer.
And you said you had that position for 3 years, right?
Yeah, I just finished in 2019, and kind of that dovetailed into me getting this job as the next chief conductor of this fantastic orchestra, the Nordwest Deutsche Philharmonie.
Yeah, and I definitely be interested in learning more about your roles as the chief conductor, what those roles will entail in just a year's time. So thank you for sharing all that with the Halle in Manchester. When your first experience as a conductor was education, so it looks like there's a very fitting connection with you and conducting with the Halle. Describe your feelings about the entire music education system and how music education has really influenced your life.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, it basically it goes without saying that without public school music, I would not be where I am today. Without that exposure, without that opportunity to pick up an instrument and learn about it, I would not be where I am today. And it's just quite simple. Talking about Charleston County School of the Arts as well, it is a public school, although one has to audition for it. It is a public school, so it's vital to me to pass this message on that music education in public schools is so quintessential. It's not a matter of an extracurricular. It's actually quintessential to have this opportunity for musicians, as I did.
I think I'm not sure how it is in the UK because you have been in the UK for quite some time now, but I know that in the United States right now there's always a discussion of defunding the arts, making sure that the money that is used for public schools go towards math and science, but oftentimes music gets left out of the equation. So for someone who's listening to this interview today, whether it's the time of the release or maybe a year or two from now, what can you say to that person to convince them in their public school why music is a quintessential thing to have in someone's education?
For me, music education gives you the kind of full rounded education that everyone should have. Although I do think that the UK supports this a bit more, kind of in the basic structure of education. I think what I struggle with in the US is that it is seen as this kind of add-on, but it's an as equal. I mean, and the studies show that it's just as equal a subject as math, as science, and it's not even equal. It actually supports the kind of human brain function to help people comprehend math and science better. So it kind of goes beyond this kind of idea that it's this extracurricular. It actually supports the overall education, and it blankets it in a way that no other art form or no other, well, not necessarily no other art form, but no other subject does, I think. Of course, I'm a bit biased with this by saying this as a musician, but there is actual studies. There are things that prove, there's subjects and studies that prove that music enhances education in a way that nothing else can. So I would say to them just to think about the statistics. It's all there. There's some great work that some of my colleagues have done, music educators and musical psychologists all around the world that I know, that have really pushed for this, and it's right there. It's in our face. But what's important is to simply acknowledge it.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that, Jonathan. I like the transition into a very interesting moment in your career, which happened maybe a few years ago when you got asked to conduct the LA Phil last second.
Mm,
Yes,
yes.
and I would like to dive into that in a lot more detail. But for those of you listening, Mr. Heyward was also an LA Phil Fellows. So before we transition into that really interesting time where you got asked to conduct the LA Phil, talk about your experience as an LA Phil Fellow.
Well, it was really, really lovely. I spent basically I went to LA 3 times out of the year. This is during my time at the Halle as well, so it was quite a busy season for me. But I really, really enjoyed it. The orchestral musicians there are so kind and so really welcoming. And what you get there is you assist quite fantastic conductors. Not only Dudamel himself, but I assisted Vasily Petrenko and got to know him really, really well. Xin Zhang as well. And the amount of knowledge that you get just by listening to this orchestra, listening to them being rehearsed, listening to them in their home was immense. I learned so much just about how, continuing to learn about how an orchestra really works and how they work in their own space and in their own home. Of course, the tutelage of Gustavo Dudamel was also a huge privilege and pleasure to really hear from. I actually had to conduct in front of him, which was really daunting. They
Wow,
were
please explain. Yeah, please explain how that must have felt.
Yeah, well, it's terrifying. It's really kind of straight up. But in the end, it was great. Basically, they were doing auditions for principal horn or third horn, I believe it actually was. And Gustavo, without any kind of preemptive measures, just said, "Can you conduct this morning? Because I want to hear them out in the hall." So I had no preparation at what these excerpts were or anything. Luckily, I knew them all.
Luckily, yeah.
Yeah, and it was great because in the end, we went back to the dressing room and we just had a nice chat about conducting and about things to maybe think about. And I found it really, really inspirational and really, really lovely, actually. And I did end up making my debut with them. That was always scheduled as a fellow. They do try and get you to do a neighborhood concert or an education concert. And I was very, very lucky because I actually got to do both a neighborhood concert in East Los Angeles at the East Los Angeles College, which was a free concert that anyone could attend. And it was really lovely. It was about 1,000 people there. And I gave this concert and I really wanted to connect with the community. So I spoke about each piece before we played it. And it was one of the most kind of awe-inspiring moments of my life, really, to conduct them. And I was really prepared for it, of course, because I knew about this. That was on a Sunday, I believe. And then I got a call the next day asking me if I would step in for this concert.
This is for the LA Phil concert, right?
That's right. So this was the subscription series that one of the conductors fell ill, basically, and they had asked me to step in on the back of my debut, which was really kind because the orchestra actually put me forward for the gig, which was just amazing to feel that they had my back kind of through this slightly daunting task of making my subscription series debut with the Los Angeles Philharmonic.
So describe the setting. Describe the setting for the audience listening in. You got a call, perhaps. Yes. Was it the day of or was it the day before?
Well, it was the day before the first rehearsal. So I was due to cover conduct anyway. So I kind of had familiarity with the score already. but it was, so Sunday was the debut. Monday was the next day when they gave me the call to ask if I was interested. I then called my agent because I had no idea how to answer it. I had no idea how to answer if I needed to make this call or was it too early. But we made this committed decision, which was really great. It's a really good thing to point out when you have an agent, having someone who's really there for you and telling you to make the right calls is so important. And I'm thankful that I had my agent in that moment. I really am. She was incredibly supportive. And so we made the call to say yes, that I would step in. This concert included Bernstein Serenade with Hilary Hahn. And the Bernstein Serenade, I'm sure you know it, Eric, but it is a slightly difficult piece, not only for the soloist, but also for the orchestra.
And I'm sure for the conductor who
yes.
needs to step in last minute. Yes,
exactly.
I'm sure that the violinists listening in are very familiar with the Bernstein Serenade. It is, and if you're not, do yourself a favor and go
please.
out online and please listen to Bernstein Serenade for violin and orchestra. It is really truly a astounding piece.
Absolutely. It's a masterpiece. It really is. And of course, Hilary Hahn has played this several times, but I have never conducted it in my life. So I basically, to kind of give you the rundown, was sleeplessly looking at the score for my rehearsals and the next day with Hilary Hahn. And Hilary is very, very lovely. She was really comforting from the very, very beginning. And I felt with the orchestra and Hilary so supported, and the administration behind the LA Phil, they were so welcoming and so warm that I had all these nerves and I had night sweats during the night, panicking, really, really panicking. First time I ever had night sweats in my life.
Wow, I can't imagine what the feeling must have been like, just like having a sleepless night trying to make sure that you know every ounce of the score. And for someone who is not a musician, describe the process of studying a score and understanding each instrument's role in the ensemble.
Yeah. Well, typically I always give myself 3 months to really properly learn scores before the first rehearsal. And I'm always 3 months in advance when I'm studying scores. So that gives you an idea of a scope of how long it takes to kind of study all these dots and try and get them all together in your brain. Because it's not only about studying every single line, you must know every single line, but then it's interpreting the music. Then you're allowed, I think, as a conductor, to have ideas about the music and shape the music in your own personal way. Now, when you're kind of pushed to the limit and you've got, only a few hours, 12 hours to do this, like I did in the with LA Phil, you have to be very, very quick and sharp about exactly what you need to do, because there's a lot of music, it's great liberty to have 3 months and to think about what you might want to do. But basically in those moments, I had to figure out, what do I need to do? How do I need to conduct this? And one of it is making sure that you get all the pulses, as close as you can to your soloist, of course. And you kind of understand the time changes, the meter changes, and all the basic things. And for a piece like Bernstein Serenade, that's actually quite difficult to do in 12 hours.
Of course, yes. So
what came very apparent to me is I had to learn very quickly, which is something I learned at the Halle, actually, because this brings something completely different into the conversation. But in the United States versus the UK, some people will experience this, but the UK is fantastic at sight reading. And that's something that they've kind of embedded into the classical music culture. And so for me, being trained in the United States, I had to learn very, very quick how to learn scores as fast, because you normally have one rehearsal. Sometimes you might have one rehearsal for a family concert.
I would even add that in my personal experience and what I've heard in the past, that I think that some of the UK classical musicians are probably the best sight readers in the world.
I think that, yeah, I think they're pretty good actually, and
They're pretty darn good. Yeah.
it's
So all you
very
UK, for all the UK classical musicians out there, we respect you. So
absolutely, absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, it was a huge shock for me when I first came here, but I actually learned a lot. And so I was using those skills actually that I learned with the Halle and that I learned at the Academy actually in London, that really helped me get through and figure out a process of studying a bit quicker. Studying so I knew that I was able to get through a rehearsal. And with the support of Hillary and the LA Phil and the administration, I ended up getting through it. And it really was their kind of support that got me through it all.
was there anything else on the program besides the Bernstein Serenade? What else did you have to conduct?
Yeah, so we did the Firebird Suite, which I was doing with them already, and then the Glinka, Rislin, and Ludmilla Overture, which is quite a lovely.
Oh, that's a classic.
Yeah, yeah, it was great. So, and for, I mean, to conduct the LA Phil with this piece, they just play it marvelously. I mean, it's no other words to put it. And then we played a fantastic piece by a woman composer named Tania Leon, and this piece was an autobiography of her life actually, and it was a world premiere of this work, which was also a daunting thing to have a world premiere on the program as well. But she made it. She was also a huge supporter. We met several times before the first rehearsal and continued to talk throughout the rehearsal process. And she really was a huge champion for me. And I absolutely adore her music. For those who don't know her, please look her up. She is a fantastic, really fantastic composer. So so on top of doing a world premiere and my debut with Hilary Hahn doing Bernstein's Serenade, it was quite a full-on. Everything else seemed like cakewalk after that.
Yeah, I knew about the LA Phil fellowship, and I heard through the grapevine and I saw on social media that you got put into the LA Phil subscription series last minute, but I really didn't know the ins and outs of how you were feeling and what you had to do to prepare. So it was very interesting just to listen to that, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of
How many
course.
concerts were in the subscription series? Did you have to play one? Did you have to conduct more than one?
Yeah, we did three subscription concerts, but in between those concerts, I still had to do my committed family concerts. So I was actually doing I think I ended up doing 7 concerts with the LA Phil in 1 week, which was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I can imagine because you're on double duty.
Yeah, exactly. Because I still had to commit, of course, to these fantastic education concerts, which I was thoroughly enjoying as well. So by the end of it, I had a really nice scotch, to say the least.
I would have done the same if I were you. A nice scotch on the rocks after that
Yes,
entire week. That must have been a relief for you.
yes,
Or a
it was,
pint
but
that
it
would have been
was,
nice too.
yeah,
um,
yeah, it was,
so
but it was really lovely.
Jonathan, I'd like to just talk about the managerial aspect and the classical music as a business. So you recently talked about how you had to consult with your agent for
Mm,
making sure that, hey, am I doing the right decision? If am I making the right decision a, for conducting the LA Phil? Is it too early? Is it too
mm.
soon? Should I conduct right away? Talk about that experience with your agent and how the conversation was like.
Yeah, it was kind of, it's that call that you always get nervous about as a young conductor, which is this break, this breaking moment that could really go well or go really south very quickly. And as a young conductor, I think it's absolutely essential for you to have someone that you can trust on the other line during these times. And I had been working with this person for just over a year, maybe a year and a bit. Um, and we, by this point, had a really lovely working relationship. And in that she would kind of almost finish my sentences in a way. She would understand exactly what I would need, kind of support wise. And that just alleviates so much stress when you're doing the day-to-day conducting, and allows you to kind of really sink in as an artist. And so I kind of, on a business front of things, I would highly suggest to everyone thinking about, doing agency or thinking about an agent, that you have this kind of working relationship that kind of collaborates with one another.
If I may add, I think it's also very important to choose a manager who is certainly interested in your interests.
Yes,
I think that is very crucial, that you know you should go about it as business as usual, but at the end of the day you should have a person actually looking out for you.
absolutely, absolutely, without a doubt. And also someone who really believes in your music making. And I think you kind of you need them to be at a few concerts. You need them to really understand what makes you unique, what makes you different. So then, because mainly their job is to sell you. Their job is to sell your artistry, to sell you in a way that looks interesting. And because there's a lot of young conductors, there's a lot of young violinists, and that's what makes this competition throughout this industry very, very difficult. But if you have someone who really believes in you first and understands your identity as an artist, then you have nothing to worry about on that end. And then you don't have to stress. You can just constantly be thinking about your work as an artist.
And I think that was all interesting what you just said. For someone who is, again, not familiar with how classical music business works, you just got a little glimpse of it on how a conductor talks to an agent or an agency or a manager. That's kind of the ins and outs of what we do as musicians. And for some of us, we don't have managers or agencies. We're not as lucky as Mr. Heyward over here. But you what you're talking about recently is just this idea of having a vision for your music making, having a vision for what you want an orchestra to sound like and how you envision yourself on the podium.
Yeah.
Can you describe or talk to us about your vision as an orchestral conductor? Where do you see orchestras, 10, 15, 20 years down the road?
That's really, really interesting. Well, I think what's very, very interesting is the times that we're going through now, and seeing what orchestras are doing in order to kind of combat the difficulties of self-isolation and cancelled concerts and all these things. What, of course, this disease is really, in this virus rather, is very scary in a lot of ways. But
Right,
what
the
I've
COVID-19
seen,
virus.
yes, yeah, and this idea that we have no control of it, and it is just spreading like wildfire. But I think the thing that I'm seeing that's really quite beautiful, actually, is the way people are connecting like never before, actually, like never before that I've seen, particularly orchestras. I've seen so many people now daily posting things on social media and different outlets that really actually get to the root of why we're doing what we're doing, which is connecting to people. And what I hope actually from this is that we have some sort of, I don't know, corona renaissance, if you will, and the idea that maybe after this, as musicians, we work harder to connect. And while we're still pushing hard to connect now through social media, which is such a beautiful thing to see constantly, day in and day out, that we remember that this is what we're here for. This is actually, when we go back to the whole, we continue this idea of human connection. We continue this idea of striving to get to our audience in bigger and better ways. I'm not entirely sure how we're going to do that with internet or things like that, but what I think we can do is take kind of what's going on in present time and apply it to what we should be doing 10 years from now. Because an orchestra is more than just a few musicians coming together to play a concert. It's kind of it should feel like the center of a community, and that's something that's really unique in Germany. When I've been working in Germany, I recently just had a fantastic tour with my orchestra in Germany. And what the beauty of what we do is we do a lot of touring around to smaller areas other than Herford, which is our base in Germany. And what is so amazing is that you see this sense of community in every single little town, every single German town that we go to. And for me, I just hope that an orchestra can just continue to be a body of community givers in a way. That's what I hope to see, I think, as an orchestra.
I think what you're saying is actually spot on in terms of focusing on the smaller towns. I actually had a recent performance engagement with a colleague who I met at a chamber music festival, maybe back in 2014, I believe, in Vermont, USA. And we always kept in touch after all these years, but we finally made the decision to finally do a concert outside of this festival. Actually, for those of you who are listening, you can actually listen to this episode. This is with Cody Hiller. This is maybe episode 30 or so, and listen to our conversation from there. But actually, Cody Hiller and I, he's a violinist and I'm also a violinist, and we were able to make a kind of like a violin duo concert. And this was, as a matter of fact, this was in a small town which I've never heard of, which is Warren, Pennsylvania, which is like Western New York, Western Pennsylvania area, which I've never visited. I've never been there before.
Yeah.
But as a matter of fact, it was very interesting to kind of go to a town that you've never been in and just share your music. It's also refreshing because a lot of us forget that we're playing for people we know.
Yeah.
Especially as solo artists and chamber artists, we oftentimes know our audience and who's sitting in the audience. But this was a very rare occasion where I was, I had no idea what to expect. All I can do is just present myself in the best possible light, play the music that I care about, and hopefully touch those hearts. But you mentioned something about community, and that's why I'm bringing this whole story up, is that Warren, Pennsylvania had an incredible community behind this concert. And many times, for someone who's listening right now, a lot of these tiny towns and small cities, they're craving for music, they're hungry for it. So if you're ever in the that's a great way to kind of share your music with with everyone, everywhere.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. And I think it's just important that this idea of inclusion, this idea that that all these little towns deserve this music, and it gets to the core of what we really what we are to do as musicians, I think. And it's just to simply connect and collaborate and connect with our audience. So that's kind of that's a lovely story, though. I mean, I think little Warren, Pennsylvania deserves music, and I think it's really important to remember that.
Hopefully after this podcast, it'll be a famous music hub now.
We'll see. I'll give you all the credit.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So before we finish, Jonathan, I'd just like to talk about your recent appointment as the chief conductor of the Nordwest Deutsche Philharmonie in Germany, and you'll be appointed there as a conductor in January of 2021.
That's correct. Right? Yes.
I'd like you to just simply talk about how the position came to be and what you're looking forward to with the group.
Yeah. So I made my debut with them last October in 2019 as a guest conductor. I'd never heard of the orchestra before in my life, but I was invited to do a guest small mini tour with them. The tour included the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam, actually, and that was my very first concert with them. And so I made my debut at the Concertgebouw with this orchestra, and we did a really fun family Halloween concert, and that really was so really, really enjoyable. Of course, because we were at the concertgebouw, but also because of the chemistry that we had. I knew from the downbeat of conducting the rehearsal with this orchestra that we had some sort of connection. They were clearly really, really looking at almost my every move. And what was so inspiring about it is their dedication to the music and their dedication to playing as an ensemble. And so I immediately felt a great connection with them. And we did this tour. We did this tour at Amsterdam Concertgebouw, and we did also a small concert in Viersen, which is another small little town in Germany. And almost, I would say, 2 months later, the intendant of the orchestra, that would be the CEO, that's what the German kind of CEO is named in an orchestra, came to a concert of mine that I was doing on the other side of Germany, actually, and just said he would like to come and see the performance, which I thought was a bit odd, being that it's a different orchestra and whatnot. But shortly before the concert, he came to me in my dressing room and he said, the orchestra would like to offer you the next role as being the next chief conductor. And this was January, and I just conducted them in October, and we only did 2 concerts together. So for me, it was a bit surreal to have gotten this, to basically been invited to have this job almost just a few months after I had worked with them. But magical, because clearly they felt a connection. I certainly felt a connection, and we just wanted to make this work. And so I was offered the job in January. I signed the contract in March, and the announcement was made in May. So it all happened very, very, very fast. But it felt right. And you can't second guess your instincts, one's instincts, I think, with music, and particularly a relationship with an orchestra and a conductor. Sometimes it just doesn't work, but there's some moments where it does. And I think you have to run with it, and you have to really hold on to it.
Well, Jonathan, I'm super pleased for you to get that position. I know that orchestra is very, very lucky. And I know that you're going to be making incredible music. And I hope to be able to go to Germany and listen to you and hear you. Maybe we'll grab a pint in Germany whenever I'm there. Okay.
Yeah, the beer is great there.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. Oh, I know. I'm Polish, so I know what good beer is.
Yeah, of
course. Good vodka, right?
Yeah, of course.
Of course. So, well, Jonathan, it's been an absolute pleasure, reconnecting, and as well as just talking about what's new in your life and all the amazing things that you're doing. And for everyone who is listening in, thank you for tuning in. I greatly appreciate every single listener who gets to listen to me and, of course, Jonathan's story, which is a fascinating story. This is the Everyday Musician Podcast, and I am your host, Eric Mrugala from London. This is Jonathon Heyward tuning in. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thanks for having me.